It's about to go through.
Chapter 28 is all about unemployment. There is a lot of vocabulary in this chapter. If you received the text or the email that I sent out, you should already be on top of this stuff. Okay, BLS, the Bureau of Labor Statistics, produces all of the data that we use to assess unemployment. Unemployment is another indicator of the health of an economy. Bureau of Labor Statistics regularly surveys 60,000 households. That's a fair number. They look at the adult population. Don't get all hurt that adulthood for the Bureau of Labor Statistics starts at the age of 16, but that is the legal age of employment in most states. To work under the age of 16, you have to have a special document called a work permit. Okay. Population, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, falls into just three groups. You are either unemployed, employed, or not in the labor force. So let's start with the definition of employed. You are a paid employee, you are self-employed, or you are working for a family business. That could be on the family farm, it could be for any sort of family business. T. Hope worked from the time he was in the 3rd grade, but he was never employed because he worked for his parents' lawn sprinkler business. You can be unemployed. How many of you are unemployed? Yup. By the way, employed does not count if your parents make you do chores at home. That's not the family business. Sorry. If you're cleaning in other people's houses, yeah. Scrubbing your own toilet is not employment.
Yeah, no.
So a few of you raised your hand for unemployed, but I wonder if you're unemployed or if you're just not in the labor force. Because the important part of this employed definition is this one. You have to have looked for work during the previous 4 months. No, you raised your hand as unemployed. How many job applications have you filled out in the past four weeks?
0.
So you are not unemployed. You are not in the labor force. The Bureau of Labor Statistics finds your answer lacking. Who else raised their hand as unemployed? Yeah. How many job applications have you filled out in the past week? You're not. You amend your answer. Not in the labor force. All right. Total number of workers, employed and unemployed, is the labor force. Does not include those not in the labor force. The unemployment rate is the percentage of the labor force that is unemployed. It does not include those not in the labor force. So if you have been unemployed and have given up looking for a job, you are no longer unemployed. You just don't count. And a lot of times that's what happens when we see our unemployment rate decline. It's not that the people who were unemployed got hired, it's just that they gave up. And so they stopped being part of this equation.
How do they get unemployment checks?
They don't. You have to prove that you're looking for work in order to get an unemployment check.
So
And unemployment benefits have a term. They eventually die.
Can you reapply?
Only if you've been employed.
What if you're employed for a month, then you get fired?
There's a minimum establishment period. Okay. The labor force participation rate is the percent of the adult population that is in the labor force. So it's the percent of the adult population that is both employed and unemployed. You guys, anybody in here under the age of 16? You are all part of the labor force participation.
Yes, she did.
Oh, she did? Alright. You are not part of the labor force.
Jeez.
So the percent of the adult population that's in the labor force. Is Noah part of the labor force? Why not?
Lazy sack of
He's not unemployed, nor is he
Never- he's
employed.
never touched a dog.
No.
No.
I shoveled my grandma's sidewalk.
Boy gave me $20.
So the labor force participation rate is the labor force divided by the total adult population. Do Noah and the koalas count in the adult population? Does Afira? Not yet.
She's just a baby. And then some people
So look at these numbers. 7 years ago, about 140 million employed Americans, almost 14 million unemployed, and almost 86 million not in the labor force. What are all those people doing? They could be growing our GDP.
What about the
Babies.
They could be trophy wives, they could be retirees, not Walmart greeter retirees, not burger flipper retirees. How about the incarcerated? Yeah. How about the,
But don't they make money if they do certain jobs in there?
Yeah, so
No, I meant like don't they have programs in some?
It's true though. I mean, we saw Gavin was doing those.
Alright. So our total labor force is the employed plus the unemployed. The total unemployment rate then, 8.9%. That is a heinous unemployment rate.
No.
I do not want that unemployment rate. 3 to 4% is pretty comfortable. It's considered to be normal unemployment. 8.9% is really bad. Hello.
Is
Yeah.
Morgan Devon in class right now?
No, she is not.
Okay, thank you.
Do you know where she's at?
Yeah.
She's missing.
where?
Oh.
Is who where?
What?
Who?
When?
Your mom.
Who is that?
You don't need that hand.
Sorry.
No.
Sorry, Hannah.
All right. The Bureau of Labor Statistics breaks down all of these numbers based on population groups. So they'll do it by race, they'll do it by gender, they'll do it by age group. It can tell you a lot about your economy. Look at these numbers. Why do white women have the lowest labor force participation rate?
Their moms.
Whoa.
Wait.
Like,
Some of them might be stay-at-home mothers, yes.
I meant
Trophy
females
wives.
in general.
Some of them might be trophy wives and extraordinarily privileged, yeah.
Hey,
That's
that's
green
green
trophy
trophy
wife.
Just kidding.
Why do black women have the next lowest participation rate?
Is it actually because the same reason?
Is it actually because what?
Like, I mean, just because of their gender? Is that like the data just lie?
It's because societally, we view women as the primary caretakers. And at a certain number of children, there's a break-even point where it doesn't pay to work because you have to pay childcare expenses. And if your rate of employment, your wage, is not high enough to cover that, it's cheaper to stay home. And that is what happens actually for both of those two groups. Both groups of women. Especially if you're a single parent.
Wait, how are you a single parent who stays home and watches kids?
Welfare. And there is a nasty little black hole in our welfare system. where you earn too much money to qualify for welfare, but you don't earn enough money to pay for the daycare for your children and still buy them food and provide them housing. It's called the donut hole, and it is nasty. And it applies no matter what gender or race you are. Look at those unemployment rates. What's going on?
During college? Oh, that's
Well, it's definitely based off what color.
So more black men are in college and are unemployed?
No, I read it wrong.
Okay.
Yeah, it's definitely saying that we employ more white people.
Well, it's not necessarily that we employ more white people.
There's more white people employed.
No.
Is it?
You know about the participation rate. Yeah, there's
Isn't
more
the
white people.
unemployment rate lower than?
Well, maybe more whites have given up looking for work. Who knows? But what could be some causes there?
Black people are much more likely.
Poverty causes unemployment?
Yeah, maybe.
That's what I was thinking.
How does poverty cause unemployment? How is poverty not the result of unemployment?
Because you can grow up, like you
If
can
they're
grow up in
incarcerated,
poverty,
it counts.
and then, like, say you have a kid, say like you are an African American male, and then your wife kind of gets up and leaves. You're in poverty, you can't work, and like you said with the
Well,
welfare.
if you can't work, then you're not unemployed.
But what if you're trying to work? Like you're trying to find a job,
It's really a lot.
because welfare's not
What
enough.
if-
All right, look at the unemployment rate of teens.
And there's so much percentage of not even looking.
There's a huge percentage that's missing from the labor force participation rate. Why? School. You guys know if you're a full-time student and you have an activity or play a sport or two, finding employment and making it fit and maintaining everything is tough. And that unemployment rate variance between the races is terrible. That Asian unemployment rate is lower than white men.
James, why are you rolling eyes?
Look at these numbers, folks.
Did you open your mouth?
Look at those numbers. Dayton, am I boring you?
No,
You're not looking at the numbers.
there was water in my phone case. And that's bad. Give it out.
To what do you attribute these numbers?
The more education you have, the lower, or the more
More
you're
money.
employed.
The more educated you are, the more likely you are to be employed, higher labor force participation rate, and the less likely you are to be unemployed. Probably because you got greater incentive to pay off those student loans. That's why only 45% of the people with less than a high school diploma participate in the labor force, because they don't have any debt to pay off.
They just play Fortnite all day.
Why aren't they employed?
Well, most of them can still be in high school. 16-year-olds.
Look at the top.
Well, like a lot of jobs, you need a high school, at least a high school diploma to work.
A lot of jobs require at least a high school diploma, but not McDonald's, not Walmart,
I mean, but
There's only so many.
not the convenience store. There's so many of those low-level jobs, all right. Why is that unemployment rate so high?
They get fired.
There's
So here's the deal. It is societal, it is racial, it is cultural. There are a lot of reasons why people find difficulty getting hired and staying employed. It's one of the things that your employer expects of you every day when you're on the schedule.
Show up to your shift.
Show up.
Don't be
on time, in your uniform if you have one, and do your job? How many of you have more than 5 tardies so far this semester? In any, across all your classes, across all your classes.
Bro, we're in double digits.
Okay, all right? How many of you who have a job, they have a tardy policy at your job? And how many tardies do you have before you get fired?
3.
How many of you have stayed home at least one day this semester when you were not legitimately ill? How many of you can just not go to work and still keep your job? You're your own employee.
Yeah, it's great.
So if you show up, or if you don't show up to Miss Penny's
Where do you
house
work?
and Mo, she's not gonna
I
fire
work
you.
at my dad's, so it makes it easier.
He can't fire his own son.
Yeah.
All right.
No, because I do too much.
How many of you have ever been reprimanded at work for screwing around or being not on task or being on your phone or taking too many breaks? Or, yeah. Okay.
I don't think it works. I'm such a good kid at work. I'm like,
All right.
"Can I help you with today?"
So here's the deal. Do you know it's wrong? There are people in this world who have not been raised to understand that it's wrong. Who have not been raised to understand promptness and reliability. Who have not been trained to exhibit respect. Have you ever seen a coworker or been somewhere and seen an employee mouthing off to a supervisor or a manager?
I've seen
Yeah, and then I
it.
didn't see them again after that.
Yeah, I saw him one time. Then that was it.
Yeah, then that person didn't come back to work, right?
Yeah.
So,
Oh my.
so the fact that we have an almost 15% unemployment rate for those who don't even have a high school diploma, who are 25 or older. The fact that they could not or would not or chose not to jump through the very low and very large hoops to get their high school diploma tells you something about their ability to conform to societal norms and standards, like attendance, promptness, rule following, attendance to tasks at hand, right? It kind of makes some sense, doesn't it? As you attain higher and higher levels of education, the hoops get smaller and they get higher. You have to be more adept and better at jumping through them, and you have to be more focused as you do so, thus increasing your likelihood of attaining employment and keeping it. There's a lot of talk about how schools are failing to teach students the soft skills. Has anybody heard the phrase soft skills?
Yeah.
So we'll send you out of here knowing how to do math, how to make change, how
How to
to
make change.
how to address an envelope, how to write a paragraph, and what a proper sentence is, and that kind of stuff. But employers are increasingly saying that the school system does not teach the soft skills, the ability to look someone in the eyes when you're talking to them, how to actually give a proper handshake,
Yeah, my mom has a model. She uses it on me all the
How
time.
to- how to properly ask a question, how to politely disagree, how to take instruction, how to accept correction. No, you're doing that wrong. Do that this way. Yes, and then do it that way. Believe it or not, folks, there are lots and lots of your peers out there, when told no, you're doing that wrong, you need to do it this way,
Has a tantrum.
will
Flip
be
the
all
desk.
up be all up in your face, will lose their proverbial poo, and not be able to handle it. There are teams in the workplaces, and those individuals who can't learn to go along to get along, have you heard that phrase? Go along to get along? Don't do well in the workplace. If you can't handle your coworkers, you're not real valuable as an employee. Attendance and punctuality are huge soft skills.
He's literally staring at me.
The ability to take one day of training and then use it. Your employer does not expect to teach you, then to give you a review, and to set up a Quizlet for you, and to be available after work to answer questions. No, they're going to say, here's how you use this cash register. Go.
Whoa, stop. Chill.
They'll give you maybe an employee manual or employee handbook and say, read this, you're responsible for everything in it. And guess what?
You don't read it.
You don't read it, and you screw up, and guess what they say? You were given the manual, you're fired.
That's a
That's a soft skill. To actually be able to read for yourself and understand and apply.
Do they have a
You can
smart
still
note
ask
on it?
questions.
Yeah.
Alright.
That is
Look at this historical chart. Since the 1950s, the ladies have been increasing their labor force participation rate, and the gents gently declining.
Cause stay-at-home dads.
We can attribute some of this to changes in societal norms, that fathers are increasingly staying home, that women are increasingly, in some instances, the primary breadwinners. But look at this. In the early 90s, it begins to level out, and by the late 90s, women's labor force participation rate is no longer increasing, and yet the men's is still declining.
What's happening?
What does that tell you about our GDP? What is the largest single contributor to
Labor force.
GDP? Labor force. And that tells you that our labor force is, well, as long as population is still increasing, then that's not necessarily decreasing by numbers, but it's decreasing by percentage. And if you are not part of the labor force, that means you are just sucking off of society. You're not contributing. And so you are likely to see a decline in GDP.
You're just taking.
All right. Sue lost her job and began looking for a new one. What happens to the unemployment rate? It goes up. John, a steel worker's been out of work since his mill closed last year, and he gives up looking for work. The unemployment rate goes down because he's no longer counting as unemployed. He's no longer looking. Sam, the sole earner in his family of five, just lost his $80,000 job as a research scientist. He immediately starts flipping burgers and serving fries. Would you like fries with that? At McDonald's. What happens to the unemployment rate? It stays the same. Is that an accurate impression of what's going on in the labor market? In B, is that an accurate impression of what's going on in the labor market? That he no longer counts as unemployed? Do you think John, the steelworker, would like to be employed?
Yeah.
Is it an accurate impression of what's going on in the labor market? That he's no longer counted as unemployed? By the rules, yes. By reality, no. What's John's problem? He's got a skill set. He's got a very particular skill set that no longer fits the labor market. He may need some additional job training. Yes, Hannah? Why doesn't C represent the labor market?
Because someone who is having a job is not.
Because that's like job security.
Yeah, that family of five is going to be
Hungry.
starving and homeless.
Well, I mean, they could just eat his. At his job.
We were accurate in A. There's your definition of discouraged worker. He's employed. In his mind, is he employed?
No.
Well, he's got a job, and he can at least hold his head up about that. He's bringing something home.
Bogus.
Alright, so if we know that it's not necessarily a good reflection of what's really going on in the economy, what does the unemployment rate actually tell us? Tells us that we have a ways to go. Discouraged workers don't count, and there are a lot of them. And by not counting them as part of the labor force, which contributes to unemployment, you just discard them. Sam, our McDonald's burger flipper, shows up as employed because we make no differentiation between full-time and part-time employment. He may only be working 15 hours a week. Maybe the summer kids who worked at McDonald's for years and years and years are all back and they're getting all the hours. Sam's literally covering clothes 2 nights a week. And you'll be shocked by this one. Some people lie.
I'm sorry.
Plants for high.
How does the BLS select the 60,000 people?
How do they what?
How do they select those 60,000 people? I mean, 60,000 is not
Random selection.
it's not a good representation of 300 something million. Well, of course, labor force is not actually a thing, but
And
The
they also
60,000
get, data from the states and the unemployment
so it's not just 60,000.
reporting state. Well, no, it is, they're only surveying 60,000,
But they
also get
supplement.
data from the states.
What does it mean that they would lie? Like, what's an example of them lying?
Yeah, I applied for 2 jobs last week and turns in, copies of job applications that never actually got turned into the places,
Do they?
so
What's
that
the
they can
benefit?
collect their
What's the
benefits,
benefit
they get
for
to collect their unemployment check. So they're actually a discouraged worker who's given up working, but they're reporting themselves as unemployed.
Shouldn't they have to? How do they not have a system where they have to show that it's been signed off and accepted? How is that not part of that?
Unemployment.
Because that'd be more government regulation and requirements down.
But we're handing out free money for them to
All right.
lie.
Most people who are unemployed for only a short period of time. About 1/3 of the people are unemployed for less than 5 weeks. About 2/3 are unemployed less than 4 months.
That's good.
Still really risky because most families, over 50% of the families in the country live paycheck to paycheck.
So if you don't have a paycheck for 5 weeks, that's pretty.
If you don't have a paycheck for
14.
4 months, you've lost your house by then. They're in foreclosure at that point. So, Hope, personal finance lesson of the day. You need to maintain 2 savings accounts all your life in addition to saving for whatever specific purpose. You need to have a short-term emergency funds savings account. $1,000 in a regular savings account all the time. That's to cover the emergency repair on your car. That's to recover the water heater that goes out. That's to cover the repair for the drain that backs up. Okay? It's not part of your regular budgetary stuff. That's to cover life's little emergencies. Then you need to have 3 months of living expenses in something like a money market account. Somewhere where you can get to it if you need it. It's not locked away from you and there's no penalty for withdrawing it. 3 months of living expenses. I did not say 3 months worth of wages. I said 3 months of living expenses.
Don't
Yes?
you want a little more considering there's a minimum? Like you don't want to take out what would put you at a minimum once you close out your account.
Then you'd have to close out your account. I mean, if you're in that situation, close out your account. So living expenses, that is your car payment, your insurance, your house payment. What do your prescriptions cost every month? Your groceries, your gas, all of your utilities. What else? You've got kids, how much lunch money do they need every month? How many field trips do you have to pay for in an average month, right? You have a dog, does it eat? Dog food, that kind of stuff.
I'm allergic to those.
The good rule of thumb,
Unless it was active.
good rule of thumb when figuring out what to put into that account is to go back over the previous 6 months of your expenses and divide it by 6. And then multiply that number by 3. You'll have had some months where your expenses were a little lower, some were a little higher. Fine, whatever.
What's more fun?
Okay. Don't just take 1 month and multiply it, because that could be a good month, right? You gotta do that. Once you've got that $1,000 and that 3 months, then you can decide how much extra money you have each month in your income. Of that extra money, 10% needs to go to retirement. 5% needs to go to long-term savings. If you have kids, 5% needs to go to savings to take care of the kids in case. And by the way, folks, the minute you find out that somebody's pregnant, you start getting life insurance. Because not only do they have to pay to put you in the ground, that kid's got to be taken care of. You don't expect the Social Security to be around to do that. How much life insurance? I don't know. How much do you expect to earn over the lifetime of that child? By the way, anybody know what the going rate to raise a child to the age of 18 is?
Probably
Huh?
Like $260,000.
Yeah, it's over $250,000.
Bro, don't have to say
Yeah.
that. They're too expensive.
I should be a millionaire. Alright,
In theory.
only 20% of people who've been employed have remained unemployed over 6 months. But most unemployment is long-term. The very small group of people who are long-term unemployed tend to stay long-term unemployed. Like John, our steel worker.
So if you're short-term unemployed, do you get unemployment check?
You have to have been unemployed for, I think, a full month before you're eligible to get unemployment. So here's the thing. We've talked before about obsolescence of jobs, right? Henry Ford put the buggy maker and the whip maker out of work. Okay. So John, our steel worker, would liken him to the blacksmith. Okay. He's all about shoeing horses and repairing your plow, right? The anvil and the fire and the bellows. And when electricity comes along and all of that stuff can be done that way, his skill set doesn't fit anymore. So that blacksmith is going to stay unemployed, right? So John the steel worker maybe needs to go back and get some training and learn how to use a computer and use some skills in a different way. Because the likelihood of him finding another job that fits his skill set is pretty weak. Increasingly, your generation is less and less and less likely to have one job all your life. Many, many people end up having multiple careers over their lifetime. Will do different things. Okay. So there's a couple of types of unemployment. You can be cyclically unemployed. The natural rate of unemployment, like I said, is about 3-4%. It's kind of where unemployment always is, because there's always somebody who's unemployed and looking. There's always somebody about to be fired and be part of that unemployed. There's always new people coming into the labor market. Next week when Noah's dad says, son, we're cutting you off, no more allowance. Noah all of a sudden just became unemployed. He's looking. But when Hannah's dad comes home and says, we won the Powerball, Hannah all of a sudden leaves the labor force.
I was like, Greg would not just be like, don't work, he'd be like, keep working.
Cyclical unemployment is the deviation of unemployment from the natural rate. It's got a really cool graph. It looks like sound waves.
Hype it up.
Hey, we say natural unemployment is right here at about 3-4%. Cyclical unemployment looks like this.
Ew.
Okay? You get peaks and valleys. You get periods of high unemployment. You get periods of really low unemployment. Do we ever get to zero unemployment? Not possible. Maybe the zombie apocalypse will get us to zero employment. We're going to study the business cycle, but unemployment tends to follow the business cycle. Boom! Look at that! Right there. That's the Reagan recession. Right there, September 11th. And right there is the beginning of the George W. Bush recession. Huh?
Great recession.
There's your natural rate of unemployment. What is ideal unemployment? I think I told you natural rate's 3 to 4. Ideal unemployment is 3 to 4%. The natural rate between 5 and 6. In all of that time, we've hit the ideal. Frictional unemployment. You're frictionally unemployed. Most people who are frictionally unemployed tend to be unemployed by choice. They've quit their job and left because they're looking for that job that makes them happy. I need to find fulfillment. A lot of teenagers tend to be frictionally unemployed. They kept putting me down on the schedule and I told them I couldn't work, so I quit. You are frictionally unemployed, princess. It has to suit my skills and tastes. Frictional unemployment tends to be short term. You'll find something else. Then there's structural unemployment. This is where our steelworker John falls in. There's fewer jobs than there are workers to fill those jobs. We only have so many steelworker jobs in the country. And as we close down more steel mills, there's an article in the New York Times yesterday about coal and black lung disease and how, whether you call it clean coal or whatever you call it, coal mining and coal usage for energy production is decreasing and declining. And some economists think that by 2050, we're done with coal-produced energy and coal mining. Because the easy veins of coal, the easily acquired coal, is pretty much all mined out. And so it's becoming more expensive to get, both in terms of killing off the people who are doing it, and it's just simply expensive to mine thinner and thinner veins and harder rock. And there are more economical ways to produce the electricity. Wind power technology and solar power technology are coming down in cost, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So a variety of things. So we're gonna see coal miners over time becoming structurally unemployed. Because if you know how to mine coal, you know how to mine coal. Okay, we'll go work at a gold mine, okay? But how many gold mines are located adjacent to a coal mine where I can just, and if there's a gold mine, doesn't it already have gold miners? Are they looking to hire more who aren't necessarily perfectly suited for the job? Right? Are you seeing what I'm saying here? So we have to do something to fix the structurally unemployed. Okay. They tend to be unemployed longer term because they need to be retrained. All right. What we're talking about is a sectoral shift. We're shifting from the blue collar, work with your hands and your hard hat into service-oriented jobs. We're getting away from labor-oriented jobs and going to service-oriented jobs. Call center, convenience store work, shelf stocker. Ask your parents, ask your mom, how many nail salons there were when she was in high school. Very few. Ask grandma. Right? Those are service jobs. They're providing a service. Because the economy is always changing, and some people are always going to be unhappy at their job and looking for a better job. Because the economy is always changing and some sectors are going away and new sectors are being developed, there's always going to be some people unemployed and needing to be retrained. So we are always going to have frictional unemployment. And that is where what comes from? 3 words. Frictional unemployment produces the most of the natural unemployment rate. Okay. So government agencies are trying to help you fill those jobs. The bell's about to ring, isn't it?
Yeah.
We'll stop right there.